Welcome back. If you're someone who loves to learn with focus and efficiency, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today's explainer is going to do something I absolutely love doing. We're going to take some pretty dense academic management theory and completely transform it into a practical, actionable, and entirely solvable formula. We're unpacking the foundations and functions of organizational leadership.
Let me just ask you this right out of the gate. What actually makes a great leader? Seriously, think about the absolute best boss you've ever had. Or, maybe the worst. We so often talk about leadership as if it's this innate, magical gift that someone is just born with, right? Like you either have it or you don't. But the research tells us a completely different story. Leadership isn't magic. It's actually a highly dynamic, observable process that we can absolutely decode.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our structured roadmap for the explainer today. First up, we'll decode the mathematical leadership equation. Second, we're going to look at the many hats a leader has to wear. Third, we'll evaluate the 3 core leadership styles. And finally, we'll distill the traits of success. Short, logical, and to the point. All right, jumping right into Section 1, decoding the leadership equation and the dynamic process of influence.
So first things first, we've got to stop thinking about leadership as just some static title printed on a business card. It's not. It is a very dynamic process constantly at work within a group. To really ground us, let's look at this foundational definition from researchers Kuntz and Weyrich. They define leadership as the art or process of influencing people so that they will strive willingly and enthusiastically toward the achievement of group goals. Notice the key words there: influencing, willingly, and enthusiastically. A leader's principal role is to influence the group, not force them. And what's super fascinating about defining it as a process is that this responsibility doesn't even have to be confined to just one person. Influence can actually be shared among different members of the group, depending entirely on what's needed at that exact moment.
Because it's this incredibly dynamic process based on needs and circumstances, researchers have actually boiled organizational leadership down to a literal mathematical metaphor. L equals F of LFS. Or, spoken out in plain English, leadership is a function of the leader, the followers, and the situation.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why leadership is so endlessly complex. Breaking down the variables, you have the lowercase l, which is the leader's character and the specific traits they bring to the table. Then you have F, the followers, representing the team members and their totally unique shifting expectations. And finally, you have S, the situation, the specific organizational context at that time. This equation explains perfectly why an approach that is just wildly successful in one situation might completely and utterly fail in another. If the situation changes or the followers change, well, the leadership has to adapt to keep that equation balanced.
Which brings us right to Section 2, the leader's many hats, and the 14 functions of leadership.
Because the situation and the followers are quite literally always changing, a leader just cannot be a lay figure, someone who just stands around looking important. According to Kretsch and his colleagues, leaders must perform 14 highly complex functions to integrate group needs with outside realities. We've grouped a first set of these textbook functions into a core operational bucket. These are your straightforward nuts and bolts tasks of managing a team. You have the leader as the executive, overseeing the execution of policies. The planner, figuring out the short and long-term ways to actually achieve ends. The policymaker, who establishes those group goals. You also have the expert, acting as a readily available source of information and skill. And finally, the external representative, serving as the official spokesperson and the communication channel between the team and the outside world. These are the classic hats you probably expected.
But then things get a bit deeper. We move into the complex relational and control duties. A leader must also be the controller of internal relations, actively determining the group's structure. They're the purveyor of rewards and punishment, which basically means using power to maintain control. They have to play arbitrator and mediator, creating an atmosphere that's free of interpersonal conflict. They act as the exemplar, setting the behavioral model for everyone else. And I find this last one just fascinating, the substitute for individual responsibility. A massive function of a leader is taking on the heavy burden of group decision-making, which effectively relieves individual members from the intense stress of personal responsibility for those really massive calls.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the surprisingly academic, almost psychological terms the researchers use for these next functions. A leader also functions as an ideologist, serving as the core source of beliefs, values, and standards for the group. And they act as a father figure, serving as a focus for positive emotional feelings and a target for emotional transference. You aren't just managing spreadsheets here. You're managing the psychological and emotional center of a group of human beings.
And, we absolutely cannot forget this final official function, the leader as scapegoat. Yes, that is literally in the academic literature. A leader must sometimes serve as a target for aggression and hostility from the group, actively accepting the blame in the cause of failure. So hey, next time you're taking the heat for a project gone horribly wrong, just remember, you're successfully executing your official textbook function as the scapegoat.
All right, shifting gears to Section 3, 3 core leadership styles and the focus of power.
A leadership style essentially represents the attitude a manager exhibits during supervision, and these have evolved significantly over time, mostly due to market competitiveness and heavily shifting societal values regarding how people expect to be treated at work. The literature generally categorizes the focus of power into 3 broad headings. Let's compare the 2 most common first. On one side, we have the autocratic style, which is often associated with Theory X leadership. Here, the focus of power is entirely centralized with the manager. The leader exercises complete control, holds the threat of penalties over subordinates, sets all goals, and demands absolute, unquestioning obedience. It's a very dictatorial approach. Contrasting sharply on the other side is the democratic, or participative style, linked to Theory Y. Here, power is totally decentralized and shared with the group. Decisions are arrived at through actual consultation, and subordinates are actively encouraged to exploit their potential to assume greater responsibilities. This style attaches high importance to both the work itself and the people doing it, which yields significantly higher job satisfaction and morale.
Let's move to and see how this builds when mapping managerial authority against group freedom. It reveals a really stark shift. On one end, the autocratic style shows maximum managerial authority and minimum group freedom. Right in the middle, the democratic style shows a balanced, shared authority. But on the far end is our third style, laissez-faire, where managerial authority completely drops off and group freedom absolutely maxes out.
Now, let's unpack that laissez-faire style for a second. It's essentially leading through non-leadership. The manager abdicates authority, sets 0 goals, doesn't really communicate, and allows total freedom, leaving achievement largely to chance. Now, you might think ultimate freedom sounds amazing, right? But the source material gives a very specific warning here. If it's not managed perfectly, subordinates can develop this frustrating habit of expecting to be consulted on every single minor issue, even issues they can't actually contribute to. And when they inevitably aren't consulted on those tiny things, they feel slighted, insulted, and actually become resentful and uncooperative. So total freedom without structure can actually completely destroy a team's morale.
And that brings us to Section 4, the traits of success, and 23 qualities distilled. So we've covered the shifting situation, the followers, and the styles. Now we return to the very first variable of our equation, the lowercase l, representing the personal capabilities and qualities the leader brings to the table to successfully inspire and influence others. The source literature actually lists 23 distinct attributes expected of an effective leader, ranging all the way from technical knowledge to pure intelligence. But instead of reading you a grocery list, I've highlighted these 7 surprising and incredibly vital qualities: social consciousness, endurance, a sense of humor, foresightedness, decisiveness, initiative, and courage. Think about your own day-to-day for a moment. Which of these do you rely on most when your team is really struggling? Often it's not some advanced technical skill that saves the day. It's just pure endurance and a good sense of humor that keeps the group striving willingly toward the goal.
So the crucial point is that leadership is a formula. It's a dynamic moving target, requiring different hats, different styles, and different traits depending on the exact moment. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to apply to your own professional life today. Looking at the equation, leadership is a function of the leader, the followers, and the situation. Which variable do you need to work on most right now? Are you relying way too much on the exact same style even though your followers have totally changed? Or has the situation shifted while your personal traits have stayed the exact same? Think on that. Apply the formula to your own life, and I will see you in the next explainer.